Everybody, thanks for coming. My name is Josh Johnson. I'm an architect here in town with ADCI, and very happy to be here this evening. I'm going to read what Jake gave us for his introduction, and then I'm going to give a little bit more. Jacob Morrison is a Madison-based architect with a diverse portfolio that includes residential, cultural, and hospitality projects. Morrison's work emphasizes the integration of architecture into its surroundings. He is a graduate of the Savannah College of Art and Design and has spent time working in Savannah, Georgia, and New York City at the firm of Robert A.M. before moving to Madison 15 years ago. He's been involved in numerous projects and engaged with Madison's urban and natural landscapes. And his recent fellowship at the American Academy in Rome has further expanded his exploration of how architecture can foster meaningful connections between people, place, and history. And that covers it pretty well, but let's just go ahead and not. Jake grew up in Louisiana, but he fits in beautifully here because he's got that Midwestern thing of underselling himself. He moved here 15 years ago, and I moved here 25 years ago. And I made it a point when I got here to be friends with only talented architects, because I'm an architect. I came from West Texas and New York. And when I got here, I looked around and I'm like, I'm going to only be friends with the people who are really talented. Well, Todd, shut up. And then Jake got to town and we had to add him to the list of friends because he was obviously talented. Let's cover the Rome Prize for a second. You folks probably don't know about it. Most people don't, but it is an enormous honor to win. Famous architects like Louis Kahn, who's like my hero of all heroes, had the early part of his career and then the latter part of his career. In between, he won the Rome Prize. And so that's the difference. I do believe Jacob is the only Wisconsin architect to ever win it. You do not apply for it. You are nominated for it. So I believe he was nominated by the Savannah College of Art and Design, which is an excellent school. Everybody I know who graduated from there has a level of intelligence, a level of, there's something wonderful going on there. But he's taken it beyond that. As my friends will tell you, I'm obsessed with podcasts. I was listening to a podcast last week, and the gentleman was talking about the facial recognition, the micro facial tics that tell you about people. And he was using presidents as a way to illustrate his knowledge. And I, of course, obsessed with architecture, I was thinking, well, this should be buildings as well, where you could read buildings. Let me tell you, when you're in Jake's buildings, there's a rigor, but it's balanced beautifully by a warmth, a joy, and a beauty. And I am not kidding. It's literally, I thought about it for a long time last night, and those are the words that come to mind when I think of his work. It's really timeless. That's why I love Louis Kahn's work. It was timeless. Jake gets there. So without further ado, I think you're going to have a lovely evening. And please welcome my friend, Jacob Morrison.
Thanks, Josh.
Have fun.
Is my mic on now? It is. Well, those are some of the nicest words that anybody said about me in a long time, and I really appreciate it, Josh. And I hope one day I can return the favor. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. There's two events here in town tonight. There's this one and the Harris Waltz event, and you know, they're about even, so in entertainment value. So I'm glad you came to this one. So I'll just jump right into it after that great introduction. Tonight, I wanted to talk about not only my work, but really talk about how architects design buildings and where do the ideas for building designs come from. You know, like people always ask, well, how'd you get an idea to do it that way or that way? And there is like a logic and a reason to it. So tonight, I want to talk about how architecture is formed through connections. So for the most part, things never get built the way they were drawn. You start off with an idea, and a space inside of a building or a building itself, it starts with nothing. And then from that emptiness, architects usually start with sketches and then complex drawings and samples, and after a long process, all culminating in the actual building or construction of the building that transforms all those abstract lines into reality. But where does that first sketch come from? And every architect answers that slightly differently. But for me and those who I learned from, it really kind of has a common starting point. This is, speaking of Louis Kahn, the sketch for the Kimball Art Museum, which turns into the Kimball Art Museum eventually. Some projects fit in with their surroundings. This is in New York. This is from my old firm, Robert Stern Architects. And they embrace the context. They fit in and they become part of that context. Other buildings like this has an historic context that then has a new layer on top of it. So it's taking old things and making them new again with the addition of a modern context on top of the old one. And then some things are just iconic and just stand out and don't relate to the context at all. But then that's another approach that's legitimate too, because this wouldn't be the same if it were fitting in. Some buildings fit into their natural surroundings and they embrace nature. I had to get one picture of a Frank Lloyd Wright project in here. I think it's required. This is E. Jones on the left in his Thorn Crown Chapel in Arkansas. Oops, sorry, it's sensitive. Other times, the nature can be inserted into an urban environment. This is a New York High Line. So this is as urban an environment as you can get in the United States. And yet we can still then have nature be juxtaposed against that and appreciate it, not because you're fitting in, but because it actually contrasts with its surroundings. This, believe it or not, is a project in Madison. So sometimes projects are private and very few people see it and experience it. This is in University Heights. Other times projects are for everybody and they're seen by everybody. This is the firm Diller and Scafidio's project, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. It's on the Boston waterfront. So not only do people who come to this art museum go into it, every shipping container boat that goes by gets to see it too. So all of these things come from a point where they start with connections, whether there's a history, to places, to people. They all form different connections. So to create, one must first question everything. That's where the real starting point is the idea of research and finding out what it is you're doing. And the question of landscape is one of the first things. Where is your building? Which is the most basic question, maybe after what is the building for? In this case, I wanted to show a project that embraces the landscape and fits into the landscape. We have a building, it's a small house, it's a weekend getaway made with wood and stone. And it's part of the landscape. Open my notes. So understanding the context of a place or a thing or a person is the starting point. From this point on, I'll be talking about my work. In this house, we really embrace the landscape. The context of where a building is located is, like I said, the most obvious place to start. In this case, it's a house located on a former quarry site here in Wisconsin. And it started as a refuge in the wilderness. And as such, the design of the house starts with the wood and stone that I mentioned. And it connects back to that landscape, but at the same time provides a separate shelter. So it's not just blending in or camouflaging itself, but framing the views from inside. So you're not just simply looking at expanses of glass, you're looking at frames and wood, the glulam beams, the wood of the ceiling. You feel almost as though you're in a tree house, but you're protected and separated from the nature while still being able to enjoy it. When one visits the house, it's typical to arrive at night. So perhaps on a Friday evening, you've driven up from a long week of work. And the form of the house from the other side, from the opposite side of the lake, is designed in such a way that the windows will light the surrounding walls to create this lantern effect. So as you come to the house welcomes you with this sort of sculptural set of shapes. So again, it's taking cues from the natural landscape without really fully immersing itself into it. Totally different kind of project from a house in the woods. This is the Mint Mark restaurant. I don't know if any of you have been there. It's opened just a few months ago. And this kind of project, it's still about place, where the last one was about place, a place being in nature and by itself. Restaurants in general are about making their own places, places that aren't part of necessarily the surroundings. They become an oasis by themselves. So to take people out of a place they're used to and transport them to a new world, even if it's just for the duration of a meal or maybe just a drink. So Mint Mark is a restaurant on the east side, and the design of the space like this has less to do with the existing context around it and creating new connections with the people who come here. In this case, Mint Mark is actually the revision and reimagining of an original restaurant. They had an original location just a few blocks away. It was much smaller, but that design started and then ended up here. This is not just a redoing of that original design. This is the original design. This original design took cues from a 1970s fern bar. So for people who aren't familiar with that, this is in the 1970s. There were lots of plants and big wallpaper ideas, or brass, a lot of wood, a lot of stained wood and pickled wood. And it was sort of the first generation of bars that was welcoming to the work crowd, to women in general, that it wasn't a seedy bar. It wasn't a place covered with sawdust on the floor. And by playing with the context and the idea of a 1970s fern bar, but then taking those ideas and changing them a little bit, we could get to this place. And then this takes it one step further, because now what we're doing is looking at the context of the old restaurant and reimagining it in a new restaurant. So you see the ferns, the brass, the wood, and they all come from a place, so designers don't just pick it out of a hat blindly. There's a point where we start thinking about it, and then it comes together. And one of the interesting things about this restaurant, all these arches on the back wall were cut apart and put back up on the new wall. So that we're literally taking the old place and deconstructing it and putting it back and saying that we're not just doing the same thing, we're going to change it a little bit and make it better. So really, restaurants do this. And so this is also taking into the old place had some wood slats, and they didn't have much money to do this. So just these little bent wood slats in the middle, and I'll go back. And on the right-hand side of the screen there, you can kind of see it. And so in this case, we had a chance to really explore that and really blow it up and make a place of sheltered oasis inside of the restaurant. So there's still a sheltering idea that you're in a context, but also apart from the context. And then if you think of a restaurant as a theater and this place they go away to and you experience this thing for 2 hours, then the stagehands and all the crew are the people cooking your meal and working in the back. But they're a part of the experience too, because you look into this kitchen, you see this kitchen, and you can experience it. And if you sit at this counter, you can talk to them. So they become part of that design. This is Suzhou, a restaurant that is gone now, but was a favorite with a lot of people. The bathrooms at Suzhou, this is kind of a strange aside, but it's talking about where creativity comes from and how architects design. The bathrooms at Suzhou are one of my favorite things that I've been a part of. I didn't design these. The designer of these was an illustrator, artist, and children's author named Andy Rash. He lives in Milwaukee, but Andy and I met in our first year in Savannah, Georgia at college. And then later we both moved to New York and both lived in Brooklyn. And through the strange path that life takes us down, somehow we both ended up in Wisconsin. Neither one of us are from the West. So 20 years later, we ended up living, a couple hours apart from each other, not even that. And so in this case, the food at Suzhou is really about simple Korean food made better. Tori Miller was the chef there, and he's a Beard Award-winning chef. And he was really trying to take simple things and elevate them. So in this case, we had the same theme, same idea or design, where we took simple dowel tile, 4-inch tiles, stock colors. None of this is specialty. We just ordered it off the rack. And then Andy put together a guide of how to put all the tiles together. And then we got murals for the cost of tiling and a little bit of extra labor to make sure it goes in the right place. Another restaurant about theater and creating a space and creating its own context. But in this case, also reflecting back on the place where the food comes from. This was Estrella, another restaurant that has gone. Restaurants in general are somewhat ephemeral. You know, they can last for 20 years or 30 years and then go away, or sometimes they only last for 2 years and go away. So in a sense, they're kind of special things. You have to appreciate them when they're there. You don't know that they're going to last forever. Estrella was a Spanish restaurant, and so we took a lot of cues from Spanish details and context, but then kind of made it more modern and clean and tried to make a more warm and inviting atmosphere in here with the wood color and the built-in lights. These are bars, so not quite as nice as a restaurant, but a place a lot of people love to go to. And in both of these, the real context was creating shelter. This is Robin Room on the right, and this bar on the left is called Muska Lounge. It's over near Monona. And in both cases, we are creating kind of this overhanging sheltered space over the bar. So it's this place you can go to and feel kind of cozy and at home and welcomed. And also in both cases, this is very simple material. So we take really simple things like sheets of plywood on the left here that we just cut into different shapes and stain, and these shapes make a wave pattern. And the Muska Lounge is right next to Lake Monona, and they have sort of a kind of a fishing theme. So it's sort of like almost like a boat hull that you could see in the shapes of these things. And then on the right, these are all just 2x10s we got at Home Depot. Cut them and put them up on the ceiling on Robin Room. Part of that reason was that the old ceiling that was above it had all been ripped apart and was just drywall. Whereas on the right-hand side of the space, the original ceiling, the 10 ceiling, was still there. And both these are very small budgets. And I do believe that you can do a good job with a small budget, but you have to be very careful and be very inventive with how you use things. So rather than pay for all new 10 ceiling, we put up these boards because the only other alternative was to tear out the 10 ceiling. We didn't want to do that. And then this is an office. And I included this office in this kind of group of restaurants because in a way it kind of is its own restaurant too. This is an office where the founder of this company really wanted kind of a pub in the middle of their office. And this pub on the right-hand side there serves as their meeting room, their lunchroom, cafe, sort of an all-purpose space that the employees can go into. If they want to work on their laptop, they can go in there. But then it's surrounded by these workstations, and even the workstations are all custom made. These steel panels and these pipes coming off of it. Those pipes don't connect to anything. They're just purely decorative. But they create an atmosphere, and they create this sense of a place that you can go to. The little cages that go around the lights, you see the fluorescent lights up there. Those are just the fluorescent lights that were in there before that we kept, reused, and built a cage that just goes around them. So they didn't change any of the light. This is an interesting project too, because this location, the founder of the company actually founded his company in this location 30 years previously. And in the meantime, his original building that he had been in was torn down and a new building was put up. But they had saved the light fixtures from the old building and put them in the new one. So he came in and he recognized the light fixtures that had been in his office. So talking about connections back to history. So this is just 2 other views of that pub space. And you can see somebody working right there in front of it. And then that's the founder's office right there. He had his own little private office that kind of blended in with the pub. The next one is about also making a place, but it's about making a place that fits in with history and context a little bit more. So this is Ella's. It's an apartment building on East Washington, named after the restaurant that used to be there, which many of you will know, Ella's Deli. And Ella's Deli, the carousel for it famously. If you don't know it, look it up. It's a Madison, was a Madison institution. And the carousel sat about right where that white truck is in the front. And so in doing this building, which was developed by my wife, who's in the audience tonight, her first thought was, well, we need to put something on the front of this building, a big mural of color. And it really is it's a connection back to that original carousel, which is lights and movement and color. And so this mural doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from that connection to what was here before. And then the rest of the building is a kind of careful, nicely detailed brick building, but it's also designed to really just frame the mural. So you can see the brick details at the top, it steps out, and at the bottom, it just makes frames around these things. And so even when you're doing a background part of a building, it serves a purpose. It has to be nice. Here's the original Ellis Deli. I looked it up for you. All of the stuff inside and the carousel are currently at Epic. So you can still go see them. Inside are places for people to gather. So we've created more spaces inside, spaces that are a little quieter and like an oasis away from busy East Wash, especially at that point, very busy street. And we even have a screen porch for them. It may be one of the few apartment buildings in New York, in Madison that has its own screen porch for the residents. And this is from the outside looking back in the screen porch, and they have their own yard because if I have a screen porch, you gotta have a yard to look out on. So this is a project we did, I wanna say, it was completed during the pandemic. So completed about 4 years ago. And this is the second building I worked with Potter Lawson with, which eventually I ended up landing there. So now, having started my own firm, worked for a long time on my own, and then working with Potter Lawson, we are now together. And this is one of those two buildings that kind of started that partnership off. So architecture should speak of time and place, but yearn for timelessness. This is such a quote that sounds like somebody's certain person would have said, right? Like, we're at Monona Terrace, but it's not the person you think. Of all the people who said this, it's Frank Gehry. Frank Gehry is maybe the most ironic person to say this, which is one of the reasons I thought it was really worth putting up. So next I wanted to talk about, I was talking a little bit about place and placemaking. And this section is really about historic context. The historic context of architecture, for me, has always been a really important part of my work. And from my earliest days studying in Savannah, Georgia, which is a town full of historic architecture, to working in New York for Robert Stern, whose work is largely based in an historic context. I don't think of any one style as being superior to another. So it's never occurred to me that contemporary is better than historic, or modern is better than mid-century. I really think that the quality of design defines if it's good or not, whether it's historic or new. If it's a good design, people will notice it. And conversely, if it's bad, people are going to notice it too. So Heritage Tavern sits in an old building, Capitol Hill Apartments, that had a severe fire that took out most of the inside, and the whole thing had to be redone. Another Madison institution here was Cafe Momar that was in this ground floor. So when the building reopened after it had been renovated by urban land interests, Heritage Tavern moved in. This is about 11 years ago. That's actually, so when we took photos of this, they just before they opened. And one of the people on the left there is the general manager, and one of the people on the right there is me, because we couldn't find people to sit down. So I often ended up posing for my own photos out of necessity. So historic context was important to Heritage Tavern. It's in an old building. It's near the Capitol. There's memories associated with this building. There's memories of Cafe Momar. There's memories of people living here. There's memories that go back farther than those. And so the interior of this is really informed by not just those memories in the historic context, but then putting a layer of, sort of a light layer of modern design over it. So we have very like subtly built in lights in the bar. Some of the details are a little bit more clean than you would see in a historic context. So it's historic design influenced by modern design. And this bar top here is mahogany. It's actually mahogany flooring that in the last 11 years has stood up wonderfully and has actually patinaed over time. This is something you see in zinc bar tops too. It takes a while for them to patina, but they create this really warm and inviting atmosphere that you really just want to be a part of. The bathrooms even, again, this is an example of sort of the historic context with a layer of modern design on it. And we put these two mirrors in the corner to make the room a little bit bigger. And you can see the kitchen back there, which again is open to the public. And if you sit at the bar, you turn right and you just look right into the kitchen. And so they become part of that. So the kitchen has to be designed. It has to be this like part of the whole fabric. So historic context and how you deal with it. This is an interior elevation of the First Church of Christ Scientist on Wisconsin Avenue. It's got that round dome on it in the front with the columns. So about, I don't know, 30 years ago, maybe a little bit more, the branding company Heaving took over this entire building. The church had sold it. Somebody else in the meantime had taken it over, made some renovations to it. Heaving bought it and filled the entire building with their company. So how do you deal with an office that's in a church? Because it still looks like a church and it wants to be a church. But you also got to do business. And we have the floor plan here just so you can see. It's a First Church Christ Scientist. It's a little bit different than typical churches, but mostly the same with a big nave in the middle. At the top there, you can see where the kind of pulpit area would have been. The bottom there with that circle, that's the entrance off Wisconsin Avenue. And then this picture on the right is actually standing in the old organ loft, which was above the kind of pulpit area. The organ obviously had been sold off years ago. So it was just empty and it had wooden slats over it. It was dusty and hard to maintain. And then we replaced that organ loft with glass so you could sit in these little cubicles, which would now be called Zoom rooms, but at the time were not. And this is looking back up from the ground floor, and you can see those, what are Zoom rooms now, up there in those glass panels, and some people working at them. But then we keep all that context around it, the columns, the half round arches, the octagonal ceiling lights, these wonderful light fixtures down the middle. And then all through the bottom here, we cleared out all the old subdivided offices. Believe it or not, there were like separate offices built into this space, and made all these new desks. You can't quite see it here. All these new desks in here that go horizontally. You can kind of see it in this picture on the right, at the bottom there, that mimic the orientation of pews. Because a space like this, the most efficient way to fill it is with pews. So we just sort of turned pews into workspaces. They're a little bit more roomy, a little bit more comfortable. But it works. And then they have these glass panels at the top for privacy. But then, you know, if you stand up, you can still see around the whole space. And then the little mezzanines that you saw on either side, which had been added in the 80s, we turned one of them into a new break room so that people can have gatherings here, lunch, etc., but still look down into their workspace and have access to those little rooms in the organ loft. This is a great quote. People ignore architecture that ignores people. Frank Camaro is a visual artist and designer who's got a studio in New York, I think. And he's a great thinker about architecture. So one of the things about creating architecture as a space for people is to make space. So that's a double meaning, right? You're literally making a space, but you're also making room for people to add their own personality and influence into a space. This is Monroe Street Art Center on Monroe Street. And in this case, we created almost like a blank canvas with all the walls. So this is a place where kids come and do art classes. There's also music classes, and they're creating stuff all the time. And there are artists who come here to teach. And so we created these areas where they could just add their own color to it over time and fill the space. So when I talk about making architecture for people, it's allowing people to come in and finish the design that you started. The architect isn't fully responsible for every last bit of design because ultimately they leave and people use the space. These are homes on the left here. You can see this bench. And it's a thing like that, or on the right-hand side there, another home, all those shelves filled with knickknacks. The architect, in this case, me, but we're intentionally creating places for people to fill with their own memories. So we sort of make this gesture to say, here's a place for you to start. It's up to you to finish it. And benches, I love putting benches in all kinds of projects because they're very welcoming. You come into a house, there's a place to sit, take your shoes off and relax and take a second before you move into the rest of the house. Places to put knickknacks and things. Then on the right here is an office that also has a bench. Also in the right-hand shot, that's me again. Again, we couldn't find anybody to be in the shot. So the photographer said, well, go sit there. You zoom in really close. It was like 15 years ago. And then these are moments in restaurants. This is Estrion again on the right. And this is Garth's Brew Bar on Monroe Street. And Garth's especially is a place where, we're creating spaces for people to get to know each other. And you're creating places for the owner of Garth's to put his own personality on it. And unlike in the sort of, I call it the heroic day of architecture, when, the great architects were just kind of imposing all their design on every last inch of the building. This is taking a step back and saying, I can't think of every detail, but you can. So we work together. You can even see some hard hats in the top shelf there from when we were building it that he put his stickers on. And then on the right here, this is really like the special things that Estrion were, their food they were working on. These are craftsmen who work on really nice dishes and have really nice materials, and they wanted to show that off. So this would change regularly. And then even the painting all the way in the back there in Estrion was from a Panamanian painter who was an acquaintance of the contractor who built the space. And the contractor's wife is, I can't remember, she is Panamanian or works in Panama, but there's a connection there. And so that's their personality. Even the contractor gets to participate. Sujio again, which we saw this right at the beginning. Tori Miller and his love of Korean food. He grew up in Racine. He was adopted, but he's Korean by birth. And his love of this kind of art that a friend of his did. We created a specific space for a piece of art to go in. We didn't know what that art was going to be. We just knew that he had to have it. I like ruins because what remains is not the total design, but the clarity of thought, the naked structure, and the spirit of the building. I think this is a great quote, because when you can see clarity of thought in a building, when you walk into a building or a space and it's obvious what this thing is, it's really kind of special. It's hard to do. So this is maybe one of the most personal projects I worked on, and might argue this is the project that brought me to Wisconsin. Up in the Baraboo Hills, west of Baraboo, near the town of North Freedom, my father-in-law, who's here tonight, bought a farm in, I think it was the 70s, and never ended up moving there. I think there was a moment in time where people were kind of thinking about moving into the country, but ultimately didn't. But he kept it. And it's this beautiful space. And you can see covered under the snow here, some old farm machinery. I think it's a baler and a windrower that go back who knows how long to this farm. The original house on this farm is a log cabin built sometime around 1850. This is my wife. She's in the audience too. This is when she was just a little kid. And then on the right here, you can see the landscape of the Baraboo Hills. And it's this great mixture of stone and quartzite and these trees and these hills, which sort of are on the edge of the driftless region as you get up in there. And then this was the original barn there. It's a round barn with a silo down the middle. And just that green roof peeking out from behind that tree is the original log cabin and there was a little pump with a windmill on it. So over time, sometime in the 80s, we think the roof of this barn fell over and there was just ruins. And so today, that barn is still there and the stone walls are still there. And then the silo is still there. And so in talking about design, this is a place that connects back not just to history, it's a place that connects back to the people who lived here and the kind of stuff that happened here, but also to a personal family level of somebody who bought this place and kept it and then wanted to kind of create a special place here. So we built on the right-hand side there, this little garage with a living space above it. And all the stone here in the silo and the barn and in the new structure is quartzite that's just pulled out of the fields by a plow every year. So as they plow, they pull the stones up, they put them at the ends of the fields, and you have tons of free material. All you got to do is move it. So we built this building with load-bearing masonry walls that are 20 inches thick. So the masons went out there and they built two sides and filled in the middle. And we put big glue lamps for floor beams and built it on it. There's no wood framing in there. There's no steel framing. It's just pure stone made in the same way that all these other walls were made. Then we also fixed these walls because some of them had been damaged when the roof fell over. And then right there, you can see original farmhouse. This faces south. So you get a lot of sunlight coming into this side, which is why there's so many windows and so much open space, like in the garage there. And in the case of the original farmhouse, the logs had just taken such a beating over the last 150 years. A lot of them had rotted out, so we had to cut them out. But then we took that opportunity to fill that back in with French doors. So if you're sitting inside now, it's no longer a dark log cabin. It's filled with light, and it's light that lights up all that wood that was there before. So this is another instance where we're just doing a very kind of soft, modern touch to an historic building. There's a little bit better view of it. And there's a fire pit there. You can have fires with your friends, or you can burn brush or whatever needs to be done on the farm. And there's this really sublime moments at sunset that you can see the silo framed by the house. So why should we look to the past in order to prepare for the future? Because there is nowhere else to look. James Burke is a great scientist and historian. So the next step, and Josh mentioned this in his lovely introduction, in my career was the American Academy in Rome. So it was this time last year that I was given a chance to visit and study in the American Academy. And the American Academy is a more than a century-old institution devoted to the study of history and arts. And I was there as the Savannah College of Art and Design Affiliated Fellow of 2023. It's a very specific title that you're supposed to recite whenever you write it down. The Academy's mission is to give people, and I love this slogan, the time and space to think and learn. So full fellows of the Academy stay for up to a year at the villa. Affiliated fellows like myself stay for 1 to 3 months. It's located at the top of the Giunicula Hill in Rome, basically on the edge of the Trastevere neighborhood. And what happens is you get a chance to come here, to live here. And there's a huge library here. It is filled with other scholars and artists. And twice a day, you get together, you have lunch and you have dinner together at a table that is 50 feet long and seats everybody. And you exchange ideas and you talk about different ideas and what they're working on. So in the morning, you may sit next to a composer, and in the evening, you may sit next to a classicist. And coming here is really just about taking a step back, thinking about all the examples of the work I've shown before: history, contemporary architecture, the context of place and of people and how that affects our designs and how we come together. And then seeing, how can you take that further? On the right here is a picture from their rare books library. And they have a book they had pulled out that had full-size photos of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. In this library, they also have Lord Byron's tour book of Rome with his notes in it. And they have tour guide books of Rome that go all the way back to like 1850. In the middle here is this beautiful studio. The gentleman in there, his name is Tom Fitzharris, and he's a painter who had come from New York. They had run out of studios, and this is the only one left, and it's huge. And he paints things that are this big. Interestingly, he has a new book coming out. He corresponded with Edward Gorey, the illustrator, who most famously did the introduction to the Mystery PBS television series, the animated one at the beginning. Edward Gorey did that. And he would correspond with him, and Edward Gorey illustrated all the envelopes he sent to him. So Tom is just releasing a book now that is just all those envelope covers from 10 years worth of correspondence. And then here on the left is just this really nice photo that shows the kind of living space. The American Academy of Rome was founded in part by the architecture firm McKim, Mead and White, which is maybe the most popular and successful 19th century architecture firm in America. And they also designed the building. So while I'm there, I'm mostly drawing and thinking about things I'm seeing. This is the Palazzo Farnese, which is now the French embassy. We got a special chance to tour it. Normally you don't get to tour other embassies, but at the American Academy, you get to do special things. And then looking at other things, again, the library, different views and sketches I was making there. So when I went there, you're supposed to have a project and work on that project. It's up to you. They don't expect anything when you leave. There's no requirement to do anything. You're there to, like I said, to think and learn. But everybody comes with the idea of working on something to focus their time and attention. And for me, I ended up picking the idea of doing, originally it was one building where I was going to make a little folly. Housing is like this big issue. It's a big issue here in Madison. It's a big issue in a lot of cities in America because we sort of stopped building buildings for a while, and now we're kind of just realizing that's a problem. We got to catch back up again. So when I was in Rome, I started thinking about, well, how can we fit new housing into old spaces and make them part of those spaces, but also still provide new services and new places for people to be? So originally I was going to do one of these little, I call them follies, because they're these little kind of fun, exuberant things that just fit into spaces. In this case, this space, this is the map of Rome, where it is. And then this little corner, these are the original Aurelian walls of Rome that are 1,000 years old. And there's a gap. And so there's this triangular gap that I was going to fill in with housing. And so originally I had this one project that I've started designing. While I was there, I decided to do 9 of these, which was maybe not the wisest choice because it's taken me this long to do one. But it's also a great excuse to now go back and visit again so I can work on the others. But each one will reflect a different part of Rome's history. So this reflects the idea of walls and this wall, and it fits into a space in the wall. And there'll be another folly near the river. And we'll kind of respond to the landscape of when they banked the river there and created a new sort of place for the river. Another one will be near the Colosseum. So each one reflects a different piece of Rome's history in a different way. And each one fits into little leftover empty spaces in the city that aren't being used for anything else. It could have a better use. And it's nice to be able to design a thing that nobody actually has to build, because I don't have to do any of the actual construction drawings for it, and I can be a little more free and fun with it. So having gone and come back, it begs the question, how does one landscape in the history of one place tell us about the landscape and history of another place? And from all those bits and pieces, from the context of history, from our surroundings, from the places we have memories of, from the people we interact with, the people who inhabit the spaces we design, all these things go into our creations from the very first kind of starting point of whenever we are asked to design a building, to design a space. when we start putting pencil to paper. And even though the rest of the arduous process of actually creating a building takes time, it's worthwhile because we create from all these different threads places that will then carry forward and influence other people to create new spaces. So most of the definitions of architecture include the requirement that architecture has something to do with human beings, which seems like an obvious quote, but you'd be surprised the number of architects who don't really think that. So ultimately, as architects, this is the end of the presentation. We're coming to the end now. Ultimately, as architects, we can't really judge our own work, which is maybe a good thing, as I'm pretty hard on myself. And I always tell people that I love seeing other people's work because I don't have to see any of the flaws or the what could have beens. I see missed opportunities, and they just see a finished product. So in any undertaking of human beings, we have to think about human beings and who's going to use it. So ultimately, the judges of our work are the people who've made those connections with and help make connections with each other. And so the final judge of any architecture are the people who use it. And, none of this architecture is any good unless we have people who are out there and enjoying it and smiling and being a part of it. And that's it. Yeah. And so I left a lot of time for people to ask questions. If you have any questions about the political campaign or Harris Waltz, that's down the street.
Can you tell us something about Robert Stern's office, or if you'd rather not, something about New York back when you were there?
Oh, New York back, anything specific? I can have lots of stories.
What projects were you working on with Stern?
Okay, so Josh wanted to, yeah, Josh had asked about any stories about working in New York for the office of Robert Stern. I do. So when I was there, I worked on very large houses. They're very fancy and very expensive houses. I worked on a house in Malibu, California that was 20,000 square feet and took 7 years of time to build this house. It was for a major CEO of a company. And it's a great experience. It's a really great thing to learn and to design every door handle and every hinge. But there comes a point where you say to yourself, like, I don't want to design this house anymore. I want to design houses for people who are like me. And so at the office of Robert Stern, we'd have our clients come in and say, well, we need the catering kitchen, we need the chef's kitchen, and then we also need like our personal kitchen near our master bedroom. And that's fine. But honestly, what I love more is here, when I'm here and the clients are like, do you think we can put the laundry room on the second floor? I just don't like going up and down stairs. And I'm like, yeah, like that's the problems that I have every day. So talking about connections, you make much deeper connections with people who are like you or who just want a little bit of improvement in their lives. And it's really much more rewarding. I should hand out a book for the first question.
That's right. And Heather, do you have any questions from online, or do we have any questions here that? Okay.
I was thorough and complete. No questions are needed.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Somebody stuck in front of you.
I do have a question from our Zoom audience member. They say, I find your interiors really uncomfortable. Excuse me, really comfortable and inviting. Sorry, Jacob.
I was prepared for it. It's okay.
However, how do you think about the somewhat impermanence of interiors as compared to the timeless objective mentioned at the beginning of your presentation?
Yeah. Every kind of project has a different kind of duration, right? If we design a house, we want that house to last for 100 years or more. If we design an apartment building, we want it to last for as long as possible because there's so much embedded time and material and money into it, and they need to last. to quote my wife, we build buildings really nicely so that in 100 years, nobody will want to tear them down. But interiors are a little bit different. We always design interiors so that it will hopefully last as long as possible. Heritage Tavern is going on 11 years and it's going strong. But it's also, you have to go into it understanding that it may not. And it can be, an interior can be changed or go out of business through no fault of your own. Estrion finally closed during the pandemic. I don't think anybody could have expected that. A lot of restaurants closed and we lost some really good businesses through forces that nobody could control. But that doesn't mean we can't look back on them, remember them, and maybe pull some of that atmosphere and feeling back into a new place, even if it's uncomfortable or comfortable.
So spending a month in Rome had to be really outstanding. How do you find inspiration not in Rome?
That's a really good question. It's very easy to find inspiration in Rome,
Yeah.
I will say. But there's inspiration all around. I think architects in general will find inspiration in very unusual places. The best thing is when you find inspiration when you aren't looking for it. And you walk into a space and you see like a handrail. And this is a very architect thing too. You'll see some handrail and you're like, oh, that's beautiful. Look at the time and attention they took to join the corners of this handrail. And that's really inspiring. And it can make you think about how you do your handrails and your projects. So in an environment like Madison, where I'm very familiar with Madison now, and I've seen a lot of it, it's maybe less about grand experiences and inspiration, and more about small moments of inspiration. And going back to my speech, I think a lot of inspiration comes from just talking to people and hearing how they experience places and what they want to see in a place. And just that verbal connection with somebody can inspire you. I think there's another one coming in from online.
There sure is. Your work appears to be extremely responsive to clients. Is there any deliberate attempt to respond to clients with neurodivergent or OCD extremes?
I don't know that I've worked with somebody with extremes. I've definitely worked with people who have, maybe neurodivergent, perhaps autistic. And my philosophy is, let's take, for instance, doing a house. Clients know how they live. The people who ask you to design a house, they know how they live. Or in an office, they know how they work. And so my approach has always been to trust them, that they know what they're doing. And if they say something that's very unusual, I trust that they're coming from a place that they just know that that's what they need. And I think it starts from just respecting people and listening to what they say and really implementing that. And sometimes those are requests that are difficult, but can be really informative, and it can be a great learning experience, and can change the way you think about future projects too. So the client's always right.
We have a virtual attendee who says he visited with Faye Jones when he returned to Fayetteville from his time in Rome, and he shared stories of seeing and experiencing the architecture of Scarpa. Did you see his work while in Italy?
Not on this trip. I have seen his work in Venice. It's most of his work is around Venice. For those who don't know, Carlo Scarpa is an Italian architect from the 20th century, whose work was very much about how you made things. And so he would make these very elaborate designs that really responded to how a craftsman would actually go about making a thing. And you could then see in his final designs the hand of the craftsman that did it. He's amazing. And Ife Jones on his own right is amazing. And, it was really about fitting in. Ife Jones is about nature and fitting into an environment. A lot of architects have visited Rome and been through the academy, and they're more numerous than I can name, but I like to think that they all share the characteristic of just being curious people who wanted to learn more.
I believe Carlos Scarpa was one of the very few architects on the planet that Frank Lloyd Wright had nice things to say about.
A rare achievement indeed.
Absolutely. And he was right.
Yeah. I like to think that Frank Lloyd Wright would have loved Thorn and Crown Chapel.
Yes. And Ife Jones was at Taliesin for a month and then
Yes,
would leave.
he did very
Absolutely.
briefly. Yeah.
So I would like to mention that Anne, who you mentioned, your wife, is an excellent developer who is everything she does in this town. We're going to be thrilled that she did. And if you package that with the talent you've seen here with Jake, that's a formidable thing that is wonderful for this city. I live in Middleton, and there's a project there that might happen. If we can make that happen, Middleton will have, I know, experience something they've never experienced from a developer and an architect with this level of talent. That may be rude to say, but I live in Middleton, so I can say it. So I hope that project goes on, and I hope you two do a lot for this city, because you can see that they don't have an errant step in them. And so please build a lot more, Jake.
I always say that the best projects I've ever worked on are the ones I worked on with my wife. And the client's never wrong. Just gonna repeat that.
Well, thanks everybody for
Thank
coming.
you.
We have quite a nice collection of YouTube videos of since COVID, really. And if you loved this work, which you should, take a look at Max Levy's YouTube video that he did with us. You'll find some of the same wonderful comfort and happiness out of it, out of your experience with it. So without any other keep you folks waiting, have a lovely evening. Thanks for coming, and we will see you in the spring, hopefully maybe even earlier in February. And thanks a lot. We've been doing this for 25 years, and it's a real joy. It's always open to the public and always free. And thanks so much to Monona Terrace and the AIA Wisconsin members who support it.
Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.